Dr. Beth here. Welcome to our teaching hospital. If you were here last week, you might remember that this is a hospital that doctors and nurses learn how to be doctors and nurses at. So it's a teaching hospital. And yesterday here at our hospital, it was a very exciting day. We had a guy who was out hiking up in the mountains and he got bitten by a snake. And some snakes are venomous, which means they inject venom into you if they bite you. And venom is bad. It's like a poison. Poison is when you eat it, venom is when it's injected. And so he got bit by a venomous snake and they brought him into the hospital. And luckily we had anti-venom, which is another thing that we inject, and it counteracts the venom so that it stops it, it neutralizes it so that it doesn't hurt him anymore. And he was okay. He was able to go home this morning and he's going to be just fine. But it was an exciting day. And it reminded me of a story. And I want to tell you that story. It's a great story. But before we do that, we always ask a big picture question. And we always spend a couple weeks talking about a big question. And the big question we're looking at right now is, what does it mean to sin? And it says to sin is to think, to speak, or behave in any way that goes against God and his commands. So if you think or say something or do something that goes against God's commands and God's character, because God is truth, God is love, that's sin. Yeah, so we're going to hear a story, and it seems like most of our stories that we're hearing have sin in them because sin is a big problem. It's our big problem. And God spends the whole Bible fixing that problem. So I want to tell you the story today. So remember, last week Israel chose not to trust God, and they chose not to go into the promised land. And so they got a 40-year timeout. They spent 40 years wandering around in the wilderness. And during that time, out in the wilderness, there's not lots of water. So there was one time that they're out and they don't have any water. And remember, God was giving them manna, which was that bread stuff on the ground, and he was giving them quail to eat. And they were complaining about it, of course. But there was one time that they didn't have water. And so God told Moses to go speak to this rock. There's a rock over there. Go talk to it, and water will come forth. Well, Moses went over there and he took his staff and he hit it. He hit the rock and water came out. Because there was another time way before that God had him hit a rock and water came out. But this time God told him to speak to it. And he behaved in a way that went against God's command. God commanded him to go speak to it. And he went against that and wanted to look all powerful and tough and hit the rock instead of speaking to it. God still gave them water. But now Moses had a consequence. And that consequence was now he didn't get to go to the promised land. He wasn't going to get to lead Israel into the promised land. Bummer. And in a couple more weeks, we'll get to hear what happened and who their new leader is going to be. But they keep going, they keep traveling, and Israel starts complaining again. We want to go back to Egypt. Oh, it's hard here. We don't like it. There's not enough water. We're tired of manna. We want food other than quail. Wine. And God got tired of their whining. So he sent snakes into the camp. And the snakes started biting people. And they were venomous snakes. And when a venomous snake bites you, it can be painful. It can do horrible things to your body, and you can even die from it. And so the snakes are coming in, they're biting people, and the people come to Moses, and they're like, oh no, what do we do? Help us. So Moses made a bronze snake. He made a snake out of bronze, and he put it up on a pole. Here's a pole. And he put the bronze snake up there. See, here's all the little snakes in the camp. And if a person got bit by a snake and they wanted to be healed, all they had to do was look at that bronze snake. And God healed them. Now, Did the bronze snake heal them? No. God healed them. They had to trust that God would heal them, and then they had to act in faith by looking at the snake. So they had to trust God first, and then they had to look at the snake. They had to do something, and God healed them. And this is interesting because even today, the sign for medicine or hospitals or doctors is a snake wrapped around a pole. It's called the caduceus. And it is still the sign today for healing. It's really cool. So next time you see that sign, maybe at a hospital or a doctor, you see a snake wrapped around a pole. That's where this story is where it comes from. So God healed them if they trusted that he would and looked at the snake on the pole. So let's review this question. What does it mean to sin? Sin is to think, speak, or behave in a way that goes against God and his commands. By whining and saying, oh, we should go back to Egypt. We don't like manna. We don't like quail. Oh, we're going to die in the wilderness. This is horrible. By doing all of that, were they trusting God? Were they going with God's commands or against them? They were going against them. So they were sinning. So they got a consequence, which is the snakes. But what does this story have to do with Jesus? There's always a Jesus connection, and this story has a big Jesus connection. In this one, they take a snake and put it up on a pole, high up on a pole so everyone could see it. And they looked at it and were saved. They had faith that God would save them. They acted in faith by looking at the pole and the snake, and God saved them. We have the same opportunity with Jesus. Jesus was perfect. He never sinned. And because of that, he could be the sacrifice that would take away our sins. And he was crucified up on a cross. And he was put up there on the cross. And when we believe that Jesus can save us from our sin, and we act in faith by asking him to, we get saved. And it's the same that they had to do. They had to believe and they had to act. We have to believe and we have to act by asking. So this was a symbol of Jesus. Was this snake Jesus? No. It was a symbol. It was something that reminds us of Jesus. Something that tells us about him. And I think that's pretty cool. It's a really cool symbol of Jesus. So today we talked about that God told his people to look at the bronze snake to be healed. And if we want to be healed of our sin problem, we look at Jesus. And he can save us from our sin problem. It's pretty awesome. Okay, well, thanks for listening to my story, and I will see you next week.